Well, hello, friends, and welcome to Soul Food. This is the third in our series, picking up the readings for the third Sunday in Lent. Hopefully, you're ready for a smorgasbord of biblical flavours as we dive into our Bible readings together today. My name's Tim Baker, my pronouns are he, him, and I'm delighted to be your host as we travel through the next few weeks up to Easter. The Soul Food campaign is a kind of invitation to you, wherever you're at, to feed not only your bodies, but also your hearts, minds, and our very souls during this season, enriching and seasoning our lives with God's love for us. And for this evening's conversation, I'm thrilled to be joined by Oscar, a local lay pastor from Kent, and Matt, a district mission enabler from Peterborough. Nice, gentle, opening, easy question. What is your favourite food? Matt, why don't you start us?
My favourite food, I think, has got to be a roast dinner. I love the fact that it's got every possible option you might want and more. In particular, roast dinner at Christmas time has extra trimmings, doesn't it? So I think a roast dinner has to be my favourite.
Well, I was originally from China. There's one Chinese special dish I really enjoy, which is spicy boiled fish. Yeah, it could be quite spicy for some of the local people. And there's one other kind of Asian food which I enjoy, which would be chicken curries.
One of the things we can do to help enrich our soul life is good Bible study, and not Bible study on our own, but Bible study in conversation. And that's why we've got three of us here tonight to do that. The Bible readings we're looking at are the ones set for the third Sunday in Lent, so you may well be using these in your churches, or a church near you may be using these if you drop in this Sunday. But we are in Psalm 63, 1 to 8, which is a kind of hymn of praise and longing sung to God. Ends with this powerful image of God as helper and the psalmist singing in the shadow of God's wings. And then the gospel reading is from Luke 13, 1 to 9, in which Jesus tells a powerful parable, a slightly strange parable, a parable in which he tells the story of a man who has a fig tree growing and not yet bearing any fruit. And after 3 years, he tells the gardener to cut it down. But the gardener begs for him to leave this fig tree growing for just one more year and promises to dig fertilizer around it and hope that this 1 year might change the story for this particular fig tree. Yes, the first thing I was struck by was Jesus is coming back to fig trees again. Jesus talks a lot about, and sometimes to, fig trees in his ministry. In today's gospel story, he tells a story of this like redemption and care for a fig tree. How do you think we can learn from this story, and perhaps particularly from the gardener in this parable?
I think the first thing, as I reflect on this passage in particular, and what we can learn from the gardener in this parable is, as a quote that is said sometimes, a voice that does not speak when it should is a voice that is not heard at all. And what I'm struck by is the gardener used their voice in like a kairos like moment, a definitive pivotal moment, an opportune time, and realizing the context in the story that the gardener probably would have been subordinate to the master, and actually didn't have ownership over said tree, but nevertheless used their voice in a pivotal moment to uh, challenge, to seek out a different path for the life of that tree that wasn't bearing any fruit at the time. And so for me, the first lesson I think is, what is our voice going to be used for and how? Because there's so much, of course, injustice that we see and recognize in the world, but how often do we actually lend and tend to and use our voice to have that kairos-like moment in our own lives to change the direction of travel for something that we see that is wrong?
And I like the parable about a fig tree that hasn't produced fruit for 3 years, and the owner wants to cut it down, but the gardener asks for more time to nurture it. So it's about God's patience and desire for us to repent and bear fruits. And for me, as a tutor before, I taught some students, and I frequently found that patience is really important for teachers because we cannot expect students to to aim for a top grade if it takes a lot of time for them. So it's about having patience, not just about grades for the students in school, but as a pastor now, I think it's about a reminder for me that spiritual growth can be slow. We cannot see immediate results, but faith just requires nurturing and time for restoration.
And to that point, I think about patience. I think whenever things Oscar that comes up, and Tim is it relates to the soul food journey that we're on in this Lenten season. It's that the God doesn't merely just wait for the tree to bear fruit. There's almost an activity that takes place, a nurturing within that patience of digging and fertilizing, and therefore growth. And change can often require intentional action within that patient waiting season as well. Maybe as we reflect then on tending to the soil of our own lives, our own souls. How can we do that, in this season? That's what the soul food journey is all about, isn't it? Is how do we tend to that soil of our own lives? So I think that's really helpful, Oscar, what you said too.
And maybe a great image for what gardening is like. A lot of it is about waiting for things to grow. Gardening's often been described as an exercise in hope, but it's not just your garden won't produce what you want it to produce if you just sit inside and watch it and wait for it. You have to get involved. I guess my next question for you both is just how do you stay hopeful in these challenging times? How do we keep exercising hope?
Yeah, well, for me, I mean, as a migrant myself, could be challenging sometimes. I remember when I came to the UK at the beginning. I mean, I arrived in Scotland. I needed to know more about the Scottish accents. And I also needed to learn about the difficult subjects as I studied theology there. And I found that being rooted in a church community was really important. And I think it's about being rooted in the community, building close friendships and sharing one another. So that's an important way for me to cultivate resilience and gain hope in the midst of challenges.
Yeah, hope is so important in a time where we are in challenging times. There's no doubt, but nevertheless, if you look at the Hebrew word for hope, tikva, I hope I've pronounced that right. I'm sure there'll be a scholar or theologians watching these videos shouting at their screen right now. But the root word for that and the meaning of it, if you look deeper at it, is it speaks of these weave strands of rope together. So I, think of it, in the terms of having a hope rope. And Oscar, you kind of mentioned one of those things, part of my hope rope. So three strands to this hope rope. One is my faith, so that's my relationship with God. But my faith, for me, is foundational, and I think we'd all admit that our faith can waver and can be challenged each day in challenging times. So there's no doubt about that. But the second part of that rope is the relationships. That's what you spoke to, Oscar, is about being in community. Relationships are crucial. And lastly, part of that hope rope is the rest, the reset moments. I think it's really important in times of challenge and difficulty that you inbuild opportunities for rest and resetting. And I think that's those three things, when they're together, woven together in that rope, help me exercise hope, I think.
Thank you very much for sharing, Matt. I think there's one more thing I'd like to share about how to gain more hope in the midst of challenges. It's about liturgy, I think. And I remember when I feel life is full of challenges, I like to attend choral evensongs and perhaps some Tay services and to sing our cries or screams or prayers to the Lord, just like the psalmist did, in Psalm 63. And in Psalm 63, it's about reflecting on God's love kindness and the joy the psalmist finds in worshiping Him. And it's an emphasis on how he clings to the Lord and how God's right hand upholds him. So I think that's the meaning of choral evensong. It's not just about reading every verse out. It's about singing.
Thanks, Oscar. It's really helpful. One of our themes later in the Lenten season is around soul music, and thinking about that moment in Palm Sunday where there's lots of singing to the Lord and how important that is for feeding our souls. But also something, isn't there, about those words that have kind of been set and said and repeated and sung for generations that we can draw strength from. We can draw strength from this kind of ancient tradition of worship and praise. Yeah, thank you. Our theme for today is around soul rest. And I wonder what part resting plays in your spiritual life.
Rest is important because it helps me recharge my spirits, and sometimes it provides me with new insights when I'm just resting around with my family and my friends. So I frequently remind myself that rest is not about being lazy. It's an important part of service. So having good rest, actually, that's an important part of pastoral ministry, not just starting in a church, but starting in my family and looking after people around me. So I think that's an important way for me to develop my resilience and having living some more time for my family and for those who I really care.
There was a Sabbath for a reason, and that Sabbath doesn't have to be a Sunday. Maybe if you're a shift worker and you're working nights, etc., your Sabbath can be whatever day it needs to be, but to ensure that your spiritual life can continue to flourish. So I encourage anyone listening, watching this, if you can't identify your Sabbath, take some time and do that in this coming week if you can, in the months ahead too.
So I want to end our conversation by just inviting you to think about what might you like to put in our little takeaway box from this week's readings, from our conversation, from something you've been thinking about this week. Is there one thing you'd like to take away as a little something to tuck into later on in the evening or the week that might keep you going?
I think for me is that I'm so grateful that the Methodist Church is really focusing on the word soul, because to me the soul is precious. It's integral to who we are as people, as leaders, and I think we need the generations of leaders to rise up to be leading from a place of soul leadership and a soul place, understanding that we need to tend to them, we need to fertilize them, we need to care for them, we need to have rest to allow that to happen.
Well, for me, I mean, the key takeaway is to embrace patience and rest in our spiritual journey. That's an important topic to focus on during the Lent. Be kind to ourselves and also extend the kindness to others. I think that's an important part for our spiritual renewal.
Thank you both very much for a rich conversation. Thank you for tuning in wherever you've joined us from. And may your Lenten journey be enriched and nourished by this conversation and many others. May your soul find rest and be well fertilised. And if you find yourself in a sticky corner, may you have a gardener who's willing to stick up for you and find you a little bit more of redemption and another opportunity to have a second chance. Take care, folks, and we'll see you soon. Bye now.
God bless.